Good morning. Thank you, Angel. Just want to welcome everyone, and I hope that today's webinar will be helpful to all of our attendees. We're going to be moving through this webinar somewhat quickly, but before we get started, I want to find out a little bit about our audience. This always helps to kind of get a feel for who is in attendance. So what I would like to do as we get started, I would like to start with a couple of questions. I'm going to ask you a question. You fill out the answer, and our first one is, what category best describes your role in construction? So if you can just fill that out, select whether you're an owner, a contractor, a consultant. And I'll give you just a few more seconds here. That's good. I'm going to close that poll, and I will let you guys see we have about 52% owners in the market in the webinar today, 18% contractors, and quite a few consultants. Let's have another question. The second one is just to find out your experience. How long have you been in construction? And hopefully all you consultants have been in construction for a while. We'll give that just a couple seconds here. Looks like we have a lot of experience out there. And there are the answers to that poll. And then the last one, we want to ask how many webinars you've attended this year. If you would mind just filling that out right quick. Right, and there's the results of that. If you're interested, quite a few of you have been in the process of attending. Some of you have attended quite a few. Well, that's good. Let's get started. I want to start our time today just talking a little bit about the construction market and the environment. As Angel mentioned earlier, I've been in the construction industry for about 25 years, and obviously I think all of us are aware that project budgets are a lot tighter these days. I know contractors are under an increasing bid pressure. They're trying to get out more bids. Bid prices are tighter. Owners are definitely benefiting in some ways, but I find that owners are struggling a bit because the contractors are struggling. It makes it harder to get jobs done. Budgets are tighter even from the owner standpoint, and more people are having to do, or fewer people are having to do more work. But the good news is, and one of the things we're going to talk about today is that technology and communication opportunities are becoming more in the forefront that allow opportunities to minimize some of these risks. In fact, in the past, a lot of the project participants minimized scheduled communication. Sometimes contractors would avoid including owners and subs in the scheduling process, which we're going to be talking about today. And sometimes the owners have avoided participation in scheduling and scheduling approvals. But in the current market, more than ever, project participants should look for ways to bring all the stakeholders on board to increase the opportunity for project success. And we will identify some of those things in just a few minutes. Just to let you know, I've worked on the contractor's side of the table for many years, but I've also spent a lot of time working with owners. And I have definitely come to the conclusion that when all parties can work together, and sometimes it requires that type of accountability that we're going to be talking about. The project will ultimately be much more successful. And the one tool that I think includes everyone in the process the most beneficially is a schedule. For example, budgets, contractors can have budgets, owners can have pay application processes, cost application process, but a lot of times those numbers can be manipulated a little bit, or they're not necessarily as accurate as they could be depending on how it's set up front. Project document logs don't always give a really clear picture of the status of a project, unless they're linked to a schedule. But because of the nature of a schedule, in the sense that time can't be saved, it can't be stored, it can't be manipulated, it is an objective measurement. Just the nature of scheduling is built on an objective platform, and it makes it a great accountability tool. So we're going to be talking today about how scheduling, your scheduling processes and procedures that you put in place can really help bring all the stakeholders on a project under an umbrella of accountability that will bring success to your project. So in the past, there have been barriers. For example, contractors, sometimes they lack the commitment to schedule quality. A lot of schedules are prepared in the back room and very little attention is paid to them. Sometimes the contractors resist bringing other stakeholders into that process. They try to hide that schedule and keep it to themselves, other than what they formally submit. Sometimes they'll try to manage two schedules. I've seen all kinds of scenarios. From an owner side, the owner sometimes will resist approving schedules, and I've seen schedules that have gone months without getting approved. So obviously the tool is not available for everyone to manage the accountability. Sometimes the owners resist getting involved in the process. They're afraid to get that, to step into that contractor's realm, since the contractor's building it. And then a lot of times an owner won't know really what needs to be reviewed in the schedule. So these are some of the barriers that we come up against in the scheduling process. So we're going to talk today about 5 steps to really help work through these barriers. So we're going to start right quick with getting involved in planning early on. And the first process that has to be done early in the project's life cycle is to determine the objectives. Now, everybody will always say, well, we want to finish on time and on budget, right? Well, the truth is very few schedules, in fact, I can't think of too many schedules that finish exactly on time and exactly on budgets. In most cases, you're either over budget or just a little under, or ahead of schedule just a little bit, or behind schedule just a little bit. So of those two objectives, or those two options, I always recommend let's determine an objective. Let's get out of here early and under budget. So early and under is better than on schedule. So in most cases, we would just prefer to finish early. And that's the number one objective. Let's finish early, get under budget. The second objective in the planning process, an early objective, is let's get a comprehensive to-do list. Really what a schedule is, and I teach this in almost all of my class at the university that I teach this to my early scheduling students. I'm not a naturally organized person, so I had to learn early in my career that a to-do list is so important. I have to manage a list to get me through my day. If I don't make it through the day operating on a to-do list, my day can be so chaotic because I can't remember what I'm supposed to be doing, when I'm supposed to be doing it. So I learned a long time ago to build a to-do list. Well, really, that's what a schedule is. It is a task list or an activity list, a to-do list that you can actually link together and put together a complete to-do list for your entire project from day one. So a great objective to get involved in planning early is to build a complete, comprehensive to-do list. It's a time-scale to-do list, and it is a great tool. So that's the first thing. Determine the objective. Let's finish early, and let's get a schedule in place that serves as a great project to-do list for everybody. If you want to hold people accountable, you need to have people involved in people's activities, to-do items involved in the planning process. The second thing in planning early is use the contract to get what you want. If you're an owner, we have mostly owners in the audience today, you have one of the best leverage tools in the fact that you control the contract. So if you want to get involved in the planning early, you can use the contract to do that. You can use the contract to get what you want. We're going to talk a little bit about early completion schedules because that's a hot topic in nearly every conversation that I have about scheduling contracts. How should we write a contract to deal with early completion schedules? The truth is, most contractors would love to finish early, and really, if we know the truth, the owner would prefer to finish early as well. Unless someone is just trying to stretch the job out for job security, most people are going to want to finish that job early. So an early completion, we know, benefits everyone if it's performed in a good way. So the only reason most of my owners or my owner clients are afraid of early completion schedules is because they're afraid of early completion claims, right? So as a result, they put language in a contract that oftentimes will deter a contractor from planning to complete early. But really, they're trying to what the owner is trying to avoid is an early completion claim, which in reality they're trying to avoid paying overhead or extended overhead for that early completion time frame. That's really what, in most cases, clients that I work with, that's what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to avoid extended overhead for an early completion schedule. Well, if that's what you're trying to avoid, put that in the contract. You can do that. You can say you can finish early, but you will not be able to collect any type of extended overhead for the duration of the contract. I've helped a lot of clients put specifications together, a lot of different ways to do it, and there's a lot of different opportunities you have to deal with early completion schedules. That's probably the one I recommend. Define your objective. You want to get out early, but you don't want to pay that extended overhead, so use a contract to do that. Here's another factor that you can use in your process of planning early is meet and agree early on the schedule. This is one of the best things, the step one of getting involved in the planning early. Since the beginning of the project is the honeymoon phase of the project. Everyone's getting along okay. Everyone's hoping to work together really well. Most everyone's on their best behavior. They're trying to hide most of their character flaws during this early part of the project. So this is the period when most parties are going to be likely, or they're going to be most likely to be amicable and cooperative. So this is the best time to get together, put your plan together, and get a good schedule in place early. This is the period when most issues surface. So if you're going to address issues early on in the project, this is when most subsurface conditions come, most design issues surface this early, most submittal issues come out during this part of the project. So the best opportunity you're going to have during the course of a project to address issues is early on. So you can meet early and agree early. As an example, you can put in a contract, and I've seen this more and more with some of my clients. They will put in the contract that you have to meet with us, Mr. Contractor. You're going to put your baseline schedule together. You have to meet with us every week prior to the submittal of this baseline so we can review it. That way, by the time the baseline actually gets submitted, you're very familiar with the schedule before it's ever submitted. And you'll identify a lot of problems early on. Some of the benefits, you'll find out whether or not the contractor is really committing to get the work planned. You can become familiar with that plan. You can start seeing some of the owner-related issues that may come up. contractor issues, you can see where there may be some submittal problems. And it'll help you get the baseline approved early. So get all critical stakeholders in that schedule, in that scheduling process early on, so that all parties have a good plan moving forward. So this is the first thing. Get involved in planning early. I can't emphasize that enough. That'll help you get a project off really well. The second step is get the baseline schedule on record as soon as possible. You don't have to agree to start holding stakeholders accountable. In other words, I have contractors or owners or maybe some of their consultants who are afraid to agree to a baseline schedule because they're afraid they're going to get involved in a claim or whatever. You don't have to agree with the schedule. In most cases, that contract is written that it's the responsibility of the contractor to get that work done. So get the schedule approved, even if you don't agree with it, get it on record so you can start holding the stakeholders accountable. Let me give you an example. For example, what'll happen a lot of times, here's the start of a project. The contractor's working on his baseline submittal, and he submits it 1 month into the project, but say the project is 2 years long. Well, a lot of times, most of the delays are going to occur during this first period of the project. That's the most volatile point in a project. There's so many issues that are trying to get recovered or trying to get progressed during that period, and most of the issues are surfacing. This is the critical period. If you delay, and so a lot of times during that first month of the project, the schedule's not being progressed, the contractor may be falling behind, submittals may not be submitted, you may have design issues that are surfacing, and if you don't get that baseline on record, what'll happen a lot of times, if that baseline comes in a month later, now you have 2 months instead of just one where that problems are coming up on the job and you're not getting those documented. You don't have a good schedule to compare them to. And a lot of times a contractor, and this is where contractors really have to watch out, they will be behind schedule already at this 2 month period, and they will, a contractor will still showing finishing on time because it's the baseline schedule. He'll adjust activities back in here, to still show finishing on time, when in actuality he's been delayed early on in the project. So it's just, it creates the potential for problems down the road. So late baseline approvals will just complicate resolution delays that happen earlier. So here's what you look for. If you want to get a baseline schedule on the record quick, there are just 3 things you want to look for. Number 1, you want to identify the critical path. This is where you can even, if you're meeting early and you're starting to work with the contractor or contractors, you're trying to work with the subcontractors, you want to identify that critical path early on so that you can know exactly how you're progressing in that project. If you're an executive and you have a project manager that's out running that job, you want to know what's our critical path, because a lot of times that baseline schedule may not get approved for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and if you don't know what the critical path is, you won't know what the progress is. In fact, I'm going to just give you a quick example, just in case some of you aren't familiar with the critical path. This is, I make my students memorize this. In fact, over the years, I've trained schedulers. I make them memorize this so they understand and they can explain what the critical path is. Here's the example. You have a subgrade activity that goes 5 days. You have an electrical underground activity that goes 5 days or the second week. And your plumber also is going to be installing underground, and then you're going to pour your slab on grade. Now, I hope all of you will be able to understand and recognize what the critical path is. But you can see that plumber has a couple extra days in there. He could not show up. Let's say that's a Monday. He could not show up on a Monday, and you would know that he's still okay. he could slide out a couple of days. That's what we call the float, obviously. And so understanding that critical path, what's critical, and knowing what has to be done. If that electrician doesn't show up, or if that electrician is behind schedule, or if that electrical submittal is not submitted and is not going to be ready for the installation, then you know your project is already headed for disaster. So this is the first step. Identify the critical path and identify what activities have float so you can begin to monitor it. The second thing you want to look at when you start getting start looking at your early schedules from the baseline on through the end of the job is identifying potential problems. In other words, you can look at it first and make sure the contract requirements are being met. You can look for long lead items, submittals that may or may not be able to occur when the schedule shows they're happening. Look for those potential problems, those risk areas that may come back to haunt you. Look for activities maybe that are on the near critical path. It's not that difficult just to identify the critical path, identify potential problems, and then the third thing I always look for is to identify fluff, and I call it fluff because it's not quite float. For example, if a contractor is prohibited from turning in an early completion schedule, but they think they're going to finish early, so they want to show that schedule finishing right on the contract time, a contractor will often just put what I call fluff in their schedule. They'll add duration to some activities at the end, or they'll add some activities in the end, which is okay. You just want to identify that. You want to look at opportunities where you may be able to recover some time if something happens. And so we'll talk about that later in acceleration, opportunities to accelerate and resolving the delays. But you want to identify those areas. Here is where we could have it. You can look for hard and soft logic. I teach about hard and soft logic, areas where you really could switch some logic to make some time up if you have to. If you identify these three things early on in the baseline schedule, you can be a lot more comfortable moving forward and getting that baseline schedule on record as soon as possible, because once you do that, the accountability is going to increase significantly. So the third step is to start monitoring progress immediately, and we'll go through monitoring that progress right away. Updates are not usually performed for several weeks. In fact, that's one of the dangers of delaying the baseline approval. I've been on jobs where literally involved in a claim a couple of years back where a baseline wasn't approved for 18 months. And it was 18 months before an update was ever performed on that schedule to see what the progress is. So since most delays occur early in the project, delaying that monitoring and measuring of progress early in the project can not only lead to disputes later on, but you miss opportunities to recover from those problems early on. And the first question you want to ask is, what does on time really mean? If you're a project manager, yes.
I'm sorry, before you go on, we do have one question I thought maybe you would want to address before you moved on.
Okay.
As an owner, this is from Dana. As an owner, we've been told not to approve the schedule, but to respond by taking no exceptions.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying there, Dana. You're saying not approve a schedule, but just to accept it. That's another way I've heard it say, or that there's no exceptions, and that is perfectly fine. There's no reason. In fact, very few contracts will ever say you have to approve a schedule. In fact, if you're a contractor, and I've worked for contractors where an owner wouldn't approve it, and it didn't matter, I would just do the updates anyway, because most contracts just say the contractor has to submit the baseline and has to submit updates. So there's no requirement in most cases for an owner to approve a schedule. They just say, no exceptions or accepted as noted, and that's important. Just so you can start, and I agree with you, Dana, that's a good point. The point is to get it on the record so you can start monitoring that progress immediately. So when you ask, here's the first question that you ask. When you ask a contractor, when you ask a project manager, see, if you're a project executive and you ask a project manager and you say, are you on schedule? The answer is typically, yes, I'm on schedule because I am showing that we are still finishing on time. Now, here's what that usually looks like. What usually is meant by that, a contractor, a project manager is, here we are, here's the beginning of project. Here is the current time frame. And the contractor or the project manager is saying, we are still finishing on the contract time frame. So they say, we are on schedule. But in a lot of cases, what really happens is the contractor slips, the project slips, maybe a subcontractor doesn't show up on time or turns in a submittal late, or there's been some design issues or whatever, and that contractor really is supposed to be at this point. The contractor is supposed to be here according to his original schedule. But what they've done is they have taken time out of this back end here. They've reduced some duration back here to still show they're finishing on schedule. So in reality, they're saying, yes, we're on schedule, but the truth is they're actually behind schedule. So understanding and knowing how to monitor progress is very important. So I use the term, what they've done, they've been behind schedule and they've borrowed time from back here. And I use the term borrowed because that's the same usually as typical debt. You're taking something that you really don't own yet and you don't know what's going to happen in the future, so you really don't know if you're ever going to be able to make up that time or not. And so it's a dangerous situation. What happens in a lot of cases, if it's not monitored properly, the contractor really should be out here and he's taken significant amounts of time out of this end to still show completion on time, and in reality, it'll eventually get to the point where there's just no way to do it. So here are the real questions. The first thing that you should do when you start monitoring progress on a job, the first thing you do is look at a completion date and say, are they finishing on time? That's what we were just talking about a little bit. Are they still finishing within the contract completion time? The second thing is, though, what is the progress on the critical path? That deals with this right here. Where should we be? This is where we will identify the real progress. Are we on schedule because we're meeting the contract time, or are we on schedule, or are we really behind schedule, but we have borrowed time from the end? So really, what is the progress? The second activity, that second question that I always encourage you to look at, whether it's subcontractors, owners, you need to look at the schedule and say, what did they, last month they said they were going to be here, they were going to be pouring the slab this week, but now they're actually pouring it 2 weeks later. So really they've lost 2 weeks of time. So obviously they had to take something from back here if they're still showing on-time completion. Then the third thing you should always look at, once again, is the potential problems. Now these, just in case there are some things that everybody needs to be aware of. These are the three questions that you ask when you start monitoring your progress during the schedule. So this is the same from day one. I start this process. If I'm on a project, if I'm reviewing a contractor schedule, or if I'm helping a contractor prepare and submit schedules and monitor their project, these are the three questions I ask every week. In fact, I've included here, this is a sample little report that I do, a little executive summary, where I will, you can see these three boxes right here. That's these three questions. Number one, are we finishing in accordance with the contract? This week, we maintained our progress. Exactly what we said we were going to do last week, we did it. And then here are some potential problems that may come up to surface in the near future, submittals or whatever the case may be. So answering those three questions, that's the most important thing you can get in an update process. I've spent a lot of time with with consultants who are looking at the wrong information in a schedule. You can look for the technical issues on a schedule, and you can write some very long reviews, but in reality, these are the three most important things, and you can really start holding people accountable during this process. I want to get to know a little bit about you, just a little bit. We have another comment from Gordon. Gordon says that case law has said that acceptance is approval in most cases, and that can be the case. Really, the issue with approving the schedules, going back to that topic, is it is the contractor's responsibility. The contractor has signed a contract to complete a project, a certain scope of work, for a certain amount of money within a certain time frame. Those are the three main parts of that contract. So it's not really a difficult issue if an owner accepts, approves, writes no exception. The key is it is the contractor's responsibility. So you can always word your acceptance or approval with a disclaimer saying that, you know, it is the contractor's responsibility, and the owner has no responsibility other than doing the support roles that they have. Let me get a couple of quick questions from you. I'd like to just get a quick question and find out, does your organization use the web for schedule updating or reporting? Just find a little bit more about our audience. And that's interesting. Not too many people are using the web for reporting. About 15% are using the web for reporting. I think we're in interesting times. I'm spending a lot more time with clients trying to move because things are becoming more remote. Project contractors are getting spread out further. So let's talk about, let me add another one. What software does how does your organization basically organize and manage submittals, RFIs, and other critical documentation? Once again, these are interesting to see because I've noticed some very interesting trends recently. I'll close that, and you can see there's a pretty good percentage are using email and spreadsheets, and about half of you are using some type of subscription or license-based application. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. We will let's move on and talk about our the next step, and this is account for every day. If you've gone through the process of getting a schedule on record, you've started to monitor progress immediately, and you've started to try to make people accountable. Here is the step that I find the most effective. Let me hide our last poll question. Here is the step that I find most effective. Here's what I ask every update session. What did you say last week or last month, the last period that we did this? In other words, what I mentioned earlier. I'll get with, I've been in subcontractor scenarios, in a subcontractor meeting where I'm helping a construction company manage their schedule, and I sit and we can go around the table, and I said, okay, you were supposed to finish your electrical and have it inspected on Thursday. That's what you said last week. And the answer typically from my subs was always next Friday. All right, that would seem like that everything was going to happen next Friday. What's really good about the scheduling process is if you use the schedule that you developed during the planning process, a very good scheduling tool, and you've had the stakeholders involved, you can ask, what'd you say last week? What'd you say last month? And then, what did you do last week or last month compared to what you said? And then, what did we do to make up the difference? I can sit in an owner's meeting or an AEC meeting where I'm sitting there with the contractor and I say, last week you said you were going to be pouring the deck on this bridge on Friday, and now you're not pouring it till next Wednesday. That's 3 days. What happened? And the important thing is every day on a contract has a value. We mentioned earlier, you can't get a day back. It's gone, right? And in most cases, you have overhead, you have risk of liquidated damages, you have all of the costs associated with just daily operation of a project that every day can be fairly significant value. So you want to account for every day. So here's the three questions that I asked. What'd you do? What'd you say you were going to do last week? What did you do? And then how did you recover? And so you'll find that if you hold those project stakeholders accountable for doing what they said they're going to do, they'll quickly begin to do one of two things. They'll either start doing what they said they were going to do, or they'll change and start being a little more prepared about what they say they're going to do. I've seen this work in so many scenarios where I mentioned the electrical sub. He says, I'm going to have that inspection by Thursday. And he comes in the next week and he sits there in front of everyone else in the room and says, no, I didn't do it. No, I didn't do it. And you do that a few weeks, and eventually they know they're going to be held accountable every week. And you will see, I can tell you this, you will see a difference start to take place in your project about how people perform. They'll either start doing what they say they're going to do, or they'll reevaluate everything they say to make sure that they can do it. And then you will find that your schedules will become a more valuable tool for information, for planning. Your reporting will become more accurate. You'll start to have more confidence in the schedule. As an owner, you'll see that a contractor begin to take his schedule more serious, and they'll begin to hit dates more significantly. And you believe it or not, you'll see a level of communication increase on the project that will really help you meet those objectives that you've defined early on. Another key component is the accounting. And I'm just going to show you, this is a little exercise I do on the projects that I'm helping out with. And it's fairly simple. I can look at a job, and this is looking at that critical path once again. And I can say, okay, during this first period, I can say the contractor lost 10 days during this first period. And so, but he recovered 5 of them by reducing a subsequent duration of an activity. So right now, he's 5 days behind schedule, right? And then the schedule shows 5 days behind schedule. If the schedule's showing 5 days behind, I want to know how I got there. And if the contractor slipped 10 days, and the schedule's only 5 days behind, I want to know why. And so I can put in there he gained 5 days by changing the subsequent duration. And then the second period comes around, and I can see, oh, the owner caused a 15-day delay, right? And the project is now 20 days behind schedule. And this is pretty simple. It takes just a couple of minutes each time to do this. And then let's say the contractor gains another 5 days in production in the next period, right? And the owner issues an order to accelerate, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, and the owner gains that 15 days back, right? And he's been able to bring the schedule back in line by managing through this process. Now, if you look at that little chart, what may end up happening, if you don't do this during the course of the project, you might find you're having to do it at the end and paying some consultant big bucks to do it. This is very similar to what they call a window analysis, where you're looking at each time frame and determining what happened to the time during the course of that project. But if you do it as the project's going along, and it's real simple, you're just looking at the critical path. You look at the critical path, and there's usually only just a handful of activities that you're having to look at and say they were supposed to be here by this date, and they're 4 days behind or 5 days behind. How did they get there? So this is a real simple little process that your schedulers can perform that'll really account for every day. And then I may put a note over here that says, oh, it was my subcontractor didn't submit a submittal. So now I know, and at the end of the project, when I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to resolve all of this stuff, I'm trying to resolve it, I can go back to this sheet and say, well, you know what, this subcontractor had this issue here, the owner had this issue here, the general contractor had this issue here, and this is kind of why we are where we are at this point in the project. So you can learn to account for every day if you're just looking at that critical path. And it's not, you'd be surprised at how simple it is when you start doing it. Once that occurs, if you can get that, if you can get this process dealt with early in the job, if you're an owner, this is so important. This is one of the reasons why if you get all four of the first 4 steps in place, you'll be in a position to avoid time extensions in most cases. Here's what happens.
John,
yes.
I'm sorry. We do have a few comments and questions starting to stack up. Do you want to stop now, or do you? You know
what? Let's continue, and okay. We're going to have questions in just a moment.
Okay.
One of the major benefits of getting issues identified early and have this accounting process done early. You can look at a delay that occurs early, and you can deal with it and resolve it. I know a lot of owners that have been on projects with owners who have been hesitant to review, accept, or particularly give time extensions. What typically happens, a contractor has their schedule together, they have a delay that occurs, and the contractor asks for a time extension. And we're still in the first month of the job. Well, the owner has 2 options, or the owner has 2 typical responses. No, right, would be the first one, or let's wait till the end of the job and see how things work out. And generally, you're headed down the road to dispute. Here is the option. Remember, we talked about fluff earlier. If you're an owner and you see an opportunity or you see a delay that occurs here, you have an opportunity to look down that schedule in the critical path in the contractor schedule and identify an area down here where they had fluff in their schedule. And you can see they originally had this much duration, but I think they can do it in this duration. So instead of giving a time extension, you simply ask, Mr. Contractor, would you you need to accelerate this activity, and instead of doing it in 10 days or 20 days, I need you to do it in 10. Tell me how much that's going to cost. And in most cases, the contractor will have a difficult time showing an extra cost associated with that. And it works the same, that's what you call giving an acceleration order, but instead of just telling them to work overtime in general, you're being specific. I call that managed acceleration. Instead of just saying accelerate, work overtime, let's find the areas where we can minimize the risk of acceleration, keep the cost way down, and it's almost always less expensive than giving a time extension, paying extended overheads, or paying a lot of overtime. You'll find that if you look at that schedule, you can either resequence some things or reduce some of the durations and bring that schedule back in line without having to pay for a lot of time extension. If you're a contractor, you can do the same. If you're behind schedule, or if you lose time in a schedule, or you have a subcontractor that is looking for, or that has delayed a schedule, you have the opportunity to work through these delay issues and minimize your risk in order to bring a schedule back on schedule and help you meet those objectives early on in the project. Now certain disputes can't be avoided, but you can usually at least know if you're doing the accountability and the accounting early on, you'll at least know how much is in dispute. You can know exactly what this delay was, and you're much further down the road in getting these issues resolved. Let's do one more thing, and then we'll get to some questions. We had we talked a little earlier. This is the same chart I was showing you earlier. The question is now, we had the contractor behind a little bit at the beginning. The owner had a delay. The contractor recovered his time. The owner had a delay. And I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, if you look at that period on the screen from 6:30 to 2:11, you can see that the previous period, the project was back on schedule. Both the owner and the contractor had recovered from their delays, and the owner had given an acceleration order to recover their 15 days. The contractor had performed better to recover his delays. And now you have a scenario in this next period where the contractor lost 15 days due to a subcontractor's delayed submittal. Okay, that's this one right here. Now the owner reduces the review period of the submittal. The contractor had 20 days in there to review it. The owner reviewed the schedule in only 15 days, so he gained 5 days on it. So the project now is only 10 days behind schedule. Now here is the question, and this will be a fun one. The question is, your project is showing 10 days behind schedule. I'm going to ask you, your project is showing 10 days behind schedule. Who is responsible for how many days? You remember here's the scenario. Your contractor was 10 days behind schedule, or the project's 10 days behind schedule. Let me pull that back up again. Let's see if we can get that to show back up. I think I messed my question up. But the question is, how many days is responsible for each? And the question is, should the contractor, one option is the contractor is responsible for 10 days because the owner made up 5, and the owner is not responsible for any of the delays? Or should it be the contractor is responsible to cover 15 and the owner gets to bank 5 days? That's another option. And I'll let you guys argue over that internally, because that's that's one of those, that's tough. You know, the question is, if the contractor slips 15 days and the owner helps him recover 5 of them, who gets the benefit of that 5 days of recovery? And that's a pretty good dispute. The total float is typically owned by the project, which is true. That's a comment from Gordon. That is true, and you'll have a lot of owners that will try to bank those days if they resequence or do some of that kind of work where they help the contractor recover time. The point is, everybody has the responsibility to mitigate damages as it can, but I can see where a lot of times contractors will try to control the ownership of that flow. Let's take some questions for just a minute. We've got quite a few questions here. Here is a question. We have Charles that says each meeting a 3-week look ahead should be presented. And that's really, Charles, that's where you want to do this accounting. I usually will take last week's 3-week look ahead into a meeting and look at this week's 3-week look ahead to see how they compare. And that's how I do that accounting. I identify the critical paths, and then I want to know how they're doing compared to what they said they were going to do last week. Here is a question from Bob, or a comment from Bob. We don't approve schedules. We do no exception taking, so the contractor can't say we approved it. We found that if it turns out the schedule isn't very well thought out, it gives the owner the ability to point to the contractor's lack of good planning as a cause for the delay. And that is true. You will find that's probably the most common response to an owner's delay claim or a contractor's delay claim, is that the contractor didn't plan their work. And that's one of the reasons why you don't approve it. But in reality, by approving a schedule, you're basically saying that the schedule meets the contract requirements. It doesn't necessarily agree that, or you're saying you agree that the contractor can do it, or you agree that it's a good plan. The point is, you've allowed that to be on the record. And one of the best things you can do, Bob, in that case is start early on. As soon as you get, we talked about it a while ago, if you will get that contractor schedule and get involved in the planning process earlier, you'll find out whether or not that schedule is going to be any good before it ever gets submitted. And I have been in a lot of situations where I've sat in with an owner to just watch or to review the contractor schedule before it's submitted. And you can really help that process through by seeing where there may be some problems and helping them walk through the process, helping them get some of those things in the schedule that need to be in the schedule, identify some of the owner issues that need to be dealt with in the schedule. And what happens, the ultimate goal, remember, is to get out of there early and to get out of there under budget, and to have a good plan to help you accomplish that. So getting involved early, and then just start monitoring early. You'll find out right away if a contractor puts a schedule in and you start monitoring from the first day, you'll notice right away whether or not it's a good plan or not. And you, by holding them accountable right away, even before the schedule's approved or whatever, as soon as you get a schedule, you start looking at that critical path and start letting that contractor know, hey, you are not meeting your dates. And you start documenting that, and you'll find that you'll get attention from executives, you'll get attention from the right people right away if you'll do that, and your project will have a lot more success. How or what can the owner do? This is a question from Joseph. What can the owner do to gain days? The owner, there's a few things the owner can do. The owner can gain days, as we mentioned earlier. You can approve things quicker. But if you're behind schedule, say if you have a delay, how can you recover delays? And I think we covered that a little bit, but let me just kind of reiterate that. If you're behind schedule, and if you have a delay early in the project, say you have a delay back here in this timeline, that's an owner-caused delay, and you're looking, you've got 10 days. The way to do that, to recover days, because you have the right in most contracts, I've seen it nearly every one, you have the right to direct the contractor to do a specific line of work or a particular item of work. You can direct work as long as you're willing to pay for it, right? So the key there is to identify areas later on down here in the project. I had one situation where I was working with a particular Department of Transportation. We were reviewing a contractor schedule. The owner had a design issue. They delayed 15 or 20 days. I can't remember. We looked down at the end of the project where the contractor had like 20 days in their schedule in 2 or 3 different activities where they were going to be hauling material. Well, we looked at that and said, you know, they could double shift that. Their truck expenses wouldn't go up. Their labor expenses wouldn't go up if they double shifted. They could cut those durations in half, and they may have to have a rental of a light plant at the most, but instead of paying 10 days of, you know, $5,000 a day overhead, $50,000, let's see how much it would cost us to have them accelerate that those hauling activities. We went to the contractor, gave him a direct to accelerate those, to work double shift, and to see how much, and to get a proposal from them on how much it would cost. And it came back, the only thing the contractor could justify was $1,000 or two for just some miscellaneous items that would occur. And so the owner was able to gain all of those delay days back with virtually no cost for a 10-day delay. So but the only way that happens is if you identify this early. You got to get on it early. Identify it, recognize it, take action, and get it resolved. Let's see. I've got a comment here from Daniel. Critical path will change due to delays in near critical activities. That's another big factor. I'm involved in a presentation and a hearing just next week where I've got to explain this. We had a project where this was the critical path 1 month, and there was another near critical path, but there was a delay on this one, and it would push this out to the critical path. But then the next month, something would happen here, and this critical path just changed nearly every week. So you have this, once again, you won't know that if you're not monitoring it closely, and it's much easier to do it as the project goes than trying to come back after the fact and and trying to figure it out after the fact. It's much more expensive. How does all this play? This is a good question from Gordon Aronson. How does all this play in the lien construction contract? The lien construction contract, I'm not sure if too many of you are familiar with it. It's a method. It's a different method of planning and scheduling, but it's still the same process. If you're using the lien approach to preparing your schedule, there's still the accountability that has to take place. And if you're not on top of it from day one, you're going to have some of the same issues. Let's see. I think we're about out of time. Does anyone, if we have any other questions, feel free to drop me a note, and I'll be glad to answer them. I just want to give you a couple of things heads up before we go. We have a couple of more webinars coming up in this series. We'll be sending a follow-up email to this with a link to handouts and a video of this webinar. We also have some training coming up for, I've trained, I used to have about 20 schedulers and with over 100 projects that we were scheduling, and I've developed some very good training programs to help them put schedules together consistently. And we've got some of that training coming up if you're interested. And just recently at an APWA conference, I presented for some new construction technology for a new age in construction. And I think you'll find that interesting. And then coming up, we're doing a presentation on My Silo, which is a new project networking. It's kind of a combination of social networking and project management. I think you'll find that interesting. We'll send you all this information. There's my contact information. If you have any more questions or would like any more comments, any more clarifications, I know we went through this pretty quick. Please feel free to contact me. And I want to thank you again. Do you have anything else, Angel? If not, we will.
I think so.
Okay. At the end, we have a survey. Please feel free to fill out the survey, and if you would like a certificate for continuing education, fill out your survey, and we'll send you that certificate. Once again, thank you very much, and hope you have a good day.